Now it's time for part two of episode 9. Sorry about the cliffhanger. Let's go ahead and finish this up. I'm Tim. Let's talk Saints. Now, the zone scheme kind of breaks out into two main types, inside zone and outside zone, when you're talking about the running game. But both are very similar in the idea behind it is to attack space instead of a specific area for the running back to go through or the ball carrier to go through. So this is just a very basic diagram of the inside zone scheme. So you're not even worried particularly what defenders are where or where they're lined up. Because what you're trying to do is, as it shows, just trying to make a wall of blockers that is moving for the inside zone scheme more vertically up the field than necessarily horizontally or side to side. They are not trying to clear specific space so much as block whatever defenders show up based on a set of rules that govern what's going on with the blockers. Typically, it starts off with the center, who's going to make a offensive call to the other blockers. Zero man is a lot typically what I've seen in videos and reading describing how they set up zone blocking rules. In the zero man, some of them call him the Mike. But that player that the center calls out is basically he's telling them that's my player. And everybody else is going to start normally counting. They normally use numbers. Other defenders in the area. And the second rule, or even in some cases, the first rule before the center makes a call of identifying who his zero man or his Mike is that he's taking. And this is all before the snap of the ball. Some rules are even so much as, remember when we were talking about the gaps in the gap scheme, is the rules are going to be defined by, is my gap covered? Meaning, is there a defensive player lined up in my gap? And if so, that's going to be my primary responsibility. Or uncovered, which means I may be involved in a double team to help one of the other players, or I may be moving up to a secondary blocker. And the reason, and this is still very, very basic, the reason why I really can't break down the rules for these blocking schemes clearly is because it is purposely designed to be fairly flexible for the blockers to identify where everybody is before the snap. Hey, what are we going to do? But more importantly, after the snap, when defenders start moving around or have presented pre-snap, like one defender is going to line up, say, in the A gap and come through there, but post-snap, he disappears because his assignment is actually somewhere else and another defender is stepping in. That's kind of why the gap scheme, when I showed you those two diagrams of a long list of all the different combinations that the defense is possibly throwing at them, in which each different version of the defense they could see, whatever everybody's responsibility is, and how the lines and dashes that we looked at start changing and everything else. Where the zone blocking scheme is, these rules, which are going to be clearly defined and used while the play is developing, to not necessarily to clear space in a specific area where the ball carrier is going to get the ball and try to run through. And this is where it gets tougher, and probably the most important person in this whole thing is the actual ball carrier. Because as this vertical wall is being formed and they're moving this inside zone run, say to the right as it's showing, they're trying to move vertically up the field, but they're also moving slightly horizontal. And that's kind of where the diagonal comes in, slightly horizontal, trying to create space. And it's up to the running back to find the space. So he's no longer running through or designed to run through a specific gap that these guys have to clear. More so, he gets the ball and he is reading how their blocks are coming out, where the space is going to develop, and he could cut up the field. And that is his main rule: one cut and get up the field, get vertical. The first thing he has to worry about is getting positive yards. And the second thing he has to worry about is getting at least 4 positive yards. And that's kind of the rule of thumb. So he's got to hit an aim point of that first cut. It may not be there. He may have to bounce outside. He may have to bounce it back inside. And it's entirely possible, and you will see some big runs develop out of this scheme where the space is on the backside and he cuts back completely across the formation and ends up picking up chunks of yards this way. It's slightly different when you're talking about outside runs because this is more designed for the blockers to move more horizontally than vertically. So you kind of have in an outside run, the goal is specifically to get the defense moving side to side a little more initially before, once again, the running back is in the same realm of high responsibility when he gets the ball, is this horizontal motion, getting the defense moving side to side, and the linemen following their blocking rules depending on what defenders are in their gap, which defenders aren't in their gap, and as they're moving, what the defenders are trying to do. But they follow that clear set of rules. They will hopefully start creating space that he needs to identify. And once again, it's a similar situation as the inside zone, where the space may be to the outside. It may be a hard one cut on the play side, to the back side. A lot of the responsibility in a zone scheme in creating space is more on the running back identifying where the space is being created and get through there and get upfield and gain yards and do it quickly. He can't dance around back there. He can't, because in no way is this blocking scheme designed for him. He has to be patient for the space to develop, but then he has to be decisive and get to that space and get through it as fast as possible. Because where this differs from the gap scheme we talked about earlier, the gap scheme is designed to make big spaces and to get through and not close up, just to seal off a particular gap. And again, the zone scheme is more designed to, we're going to create space somewhere along the line of scrimmage for the ball carrier to get to identify that space and get through it, get upfield, get vertical, gain yards. Let's go score points. The good guys win. Hooray. Couple plays out of the zone blocking scheme that they ran last year. Both of them happened to be against Tampa Bay. The first game we played them. And the first one's an outside zone. Kind of easy to pick up when you're looking at what the left side of the line is doing. It's an outside zone left. And they're getting their horizontal side to side movement, getting the defense to move that way before starting to work upfield. At this point, Alvin's about ready to pick up the ball or get the ball. One thing to notice, Tampa Bay has two real good linebackers, Devin White and Levante David. I think this is White right around the middle of the fleur-de-lis and at the edge. I'm pretty sure that's Levante David. It really doesn't matter. They're both very, very good, and they're already recognizing that flow and starting to fill in. And it's not a bad job of having this blocked up. The space is really over here, and I think Alvin probably saw it, but open it up, but he wasn't quite squared up into his cut yet, and he did the next best thing, which is rule number one: get upfield to make sure you get positive yards. which he does do. I think that's depending on the spot, 3, 4. I don't think it's more than that yard gain, but not terribly bad for an outside zone. If you pull up video of Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco doing the same thing, it's going to look a lot different. But just to show there were times last year where the Saints did do an outside zone, and this next play is actually an inside zone, which they use a little pre-snap motion, which was incredibly rare for Pete Carmichael to use, and apparently for Kyle Shanahan is frequently used. And inside zone, they're already starting to get more vertical than they are horizontal. And on this one, Alvin does a fantastic job of seeing the space. It was on the cutback on the backside. He actually has a blocker in Taysom Hill right here to shield this guy. This guy is not going to get in the play from there, but everybody else is sealed off and basically trapped, except for Alvin slips. The turf monster gets him. He goes down, kind of crawls forward, and the guy that had no shot at him actually ends up making the tackle. But just prior to that, if I can back it up far enough, right there, if he keeps his feet and Michael Thomas is pinching down and hopefully gets in the way of this guy, he didn't even really have to do much from there. If Alvin had kept his feet, it's one-on-one with the free safety, and sort of like the example we showed on that gap run where Alvin against Atlanta, where Alvin again had a nice gash up the middle like this, and it was up to one guy having to save him. And this is going to be a tough ask for him if Alvin is moving full speed and that much space upfield towards the goal line. So there you have it, the gap scheme versus the zone scheme. When I first got into this, I was a total noob when it. Oh, and we have a cameo by Sweetie Pie, the Saints kitty. Think she's actually getting into nap mode. But when I got into this, I was a total noob. Knew even less than I thought I knew about the two main blocking schemes used in the NFL run game, and really, as I found out, college game, high school, I couldn't believe the number of videos out there on YouTube from high school coaches giving just seminars on this for an hour on these types of blocking schemes and really how much goes into it. So I gave you the minimal view to make the point in a couple of videos to try to illustrate that I don't know if I'm still a noob, but there's still a whole lot I don't know. But what I think I learned is, the old expression, if you can't take the mountain to the man, then take the man to the mountain. It's kind of the two different philosophies. In the gap scheme, you're basically trying to move a mountain. But in the zone scheme, you more or less moving the man. And to tie this all together from where it started, it's like, who should the Saints draft at number 14? Got to be an offensive line. Offensive line is the biggest problem. And I don't disagree with that necessarily. But as I'm watching it, the media coverage or anything that's coming from fans or just anything vocal out there, and in some cases, so-called draft experts who are throwing mock drafts out like frisbees, hearing very little to even acknowledge the fact that there's two different schemes involved. What the Saints have done in the past, up until or through the end of 2023 and then making the change in 2024 to something that's kind of at the face of it completely different than what they've been doing pretty much since their existence, because I don't know if they've ever run any type of zone scheme. So the first thing I'm thinking of when looking at if we need to go offensive line, did they play in a zone scheme in college? Odds are they probably did. It seems to be very, very prevalent in the spread type offenses and all that you typically see in college. Um, but that's more of a feeling and just kind of what I saw. I don't know that for a fact, so this is just very, very much my opinion with very limited research and knowledge behind it. But I feel like, especially now that I'm recognizing what I've been watching recently in college football, going probably to a certain degree. I think much like the NFL, they probably run at some point, or players who've been in college 3 and 4 years have been exposed at some point to both sides of the scheme. But just kind of looking at the two differences, if a player, an offensive lineman, has played in both schemes, but specifically the zone scheme, because unless Clint Kubiak plans on, and he could, incorporating more gap than Shanahan traditionally does. And as far as I know, the predecessors that we had talked about, Shanahan Sr., Kubiak Sr. did. First thing that comes to mind for me, or the second thing that comes to mind after are they exposed to the zone scheme previously? Can they move? They're going to have to move. They're going to have to be able to move vertically when you're talking about the inside zone, as well as horizontally when you're focusing more on the outside zone. And starting to look, trying to just that two simple things. Do we have any knowledge that they have experience in the zone scheme, and can they move? And start doing my own research, going, sometimes you can't even find that. Mock drafts, experts, media, fans, all talking, well, we should take this guy. We should pounding the table for the offensive tackle from who knows where university or whatever. Kind of want those two things, because the last thing that I want them to do is draft a guy who's been primarily gap scheme and is just meant to push a mountain and push a mountain in a given direction, and not having to push it very far, because all he's pushing that mountain for is to stay out of the designed area where the ball is supposed to be run, as opposed to he's going to have to move. That mountain's going to have to move forward, backwards. Well, not really backwards, but more forward, side to side, to create the space for that running back to find and gain yards and make plays out of. I mean, it's pretty important two tidbits of information. So I have what I thought was going to literally be an episode or two addressing that has backed off into a 2-part 1 episode of, hey, there's a lot going in to understanding what's going on before we start grabbing names out of a hat. And I feel like the not so good drafts that the Saints have had recently, the list, it's been pulling names out of a hat. And in Dennis Allen's own words, and kind of backed up with some of the stuff Mickey Loomis has said recently, there seems to be a refocus on when we're adding players to our roster. Do they fit? Are they the type of player that fits what we want to do, what we're trying to accomplish. And so hopefully the next episode, I've been able to find, theoretically at least, because I don't know the minds of Mickey Loomis and Dennis Allen, and I don't know if I want to, because at times they seem loonier than a bag full of cats being thrown off a bridge. It I guess I kind of have to go there and get in their heads a little bit, or try to. But who on these? Because the top ranked offensive tackle, and commonly I know the name is Joe Alt from Notre Dame, but even there's some debate about some other guys, or the top 3 or 4 on the list. It's entirely possible there are 4 guys that will not fit what Kubiak and the new offensive staff is trying to build in New Orleans. They just may not be the type of player they need. And nobody seems to acknowledge or address that as even a possibility. Take the best offensive lineman, take the best. What is the best offensive lineman for the Saints? That's the real question. Or the best offensive lineman for this scheme that the Saints can get their hands on in the next year, already on the roster, in which case 14 is not an offensive lineman. Or the best fits at offensive lineman a little further down everybody's draft board. And we're no longer competing with teams desperate for offensive linemen, because there is a few. The Jets come to mind and a few others, Chicago, that would potentially be looking at some of these names on the offensive line. But then you think somebody like Frisco, who's sitting back there in the second to last pick in the first round, going, yeah, y'all take those guys because it's not our type of player. It's not our type of offensive line. And if they want to add one, they're looking at somebody in the second tier of those offensive tackle lists, or guards, or center, or whatever position you may be looking at. Or the Saints, maybe. Those guys are our type of players, and we can get them at number 45. So let's reevaluate. What's the next type of player we need to define to figure out what's going to make this team better? I hope that's what they're doing. That's what they're pretty much the word so far this season is what they're trying to do. And I think it's very important for this, as they're kind of rebuilding and trying to reshape the franchise and get it moving back forward again. I think this year is critical, and critical. And we can't keep missing on first rounders, can't keep missing on second rounders. These guys got to show up and play. And they've got to find, in their own words, the right type of players. I'll do my humble best in the next few days to see if I can't figure out who those players are, and I'll get back to you. So that's all we have. I would normally say for today, but basically this week, as this is part 2. Thank you for sticking around. Sorry about the cliffhanger, but again, just the way kind of things worked out overall. That's how it had to happen. Let me know what you think in the comments, as usual. Keep it in mind that anything you may have commented on part 1 may have been addressed in this one in part 2. Please like, share, subscribe. My Rumblers, go ahead, hit that follow. Let's get those subscription numbers up. Let's keep getting the word out. And until next time, I'm Tim. Peace out. Who dat?